When my sister moved in for support, my mom said it would be temporary. A month later, my name was off the lease. My boxes were on the porch, and my sister was sipping wine in my kitchen. They thought they'd humiliated me. But what they didn't know was my name wasn't just on the lease, it was on the loan. And when I left, I didn't just pack up my things, I took the mortgage payments with me. My name is Megan Blake. I'm 32 years old, and for the last year, I believed I had secured my family's future. I was wrong. I was securing their comfort at my own expense, a fact that became brutally clear over a plate of my mother's dry pot roast. The three of us were sitting at the heavy oak dining table I'd bought for her birthday 2 years ago. The air was thick with the unspoken things that hang between a mother and her daughters after a major life disruption. In this case, the disruption was my younger sister, Rachel, whose short, disastrous marriage had just imploded, sending her back to the nest with 2 suitcases and a victim complex. She'd been moving in for support for a month that had seen my space shrink and the house's ambient stress level skyrocket. Her things bled out of the guest room, piles of clothes on the armchair in the living room, a half-dozen different scented lotions colonizing the bathroom counter, her emotionally supportive water bottle perpetually leaving a ring of condensation on the coffee table. I'd been patient, telling myself it was temporary, that she was family, and that this was what families did. My mother, Linda, cleared her throat, a soft, delicate sound that always preceded an unbreakable decree. She dabbed the corners of her mouth with a napkin, her movements precise and practiced. She looked at me, her expression a carefully constructed mask of maternal concern. "Megan, honey," she began, her voice as smooth and gentle as it was when she was telling me to brush my hair as a child. "Rachel is going to need some time to get back on her feet. We all want to be here for her, of course." I nodded, chewing a piece of carrot that suddenly tasted like wood pulp. "Of course, we do." "Well," she continued, placing her fork and knife perfectly parallel on her plate, "she needs stability, a real space to call her own while she heals. It's just not fair for her to be living out of a guest room in her own family home." A cold knot began to form in my stomach. I knew this house. I knew every creak in the floorboards and every chip in the paint. I also knew that the guest room was perfectly comfortable. With a new mattress I'd paid for last Christmas. "She's welcome to stay as long as she needs," I said carefully, looking from my mother to my sister. Rachel was pushing a single pea around her plate with her fork, the picture of wounded fragility. "That's the thing, sweetie," my mother said, her voice dropping into a tone of gentle persuasion that set all my alarms screaming. It would be better for her to have the master bedroom, to feel properly settled. "We were thinking, maybe you could find somewhere else to stay for a while, just for a little bit, until Rachel is feeling stronger." The silence that followed was deafening. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, the frantic thumping of my own heart. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to laugh and say she was only kidding, that she was just trying to get a rise out of me. But her face was perfectly, unnervingly sincere. A laugh escaped my lips, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "You're joking, right?" I looked at the walls around me, at the framed photos on the mantel, photos of me at my college graduation, of Rachel at her wedding, of the 3 of us on a vacation I had funded. "You want me to move out of my own house?" I emphasized the word "my," because that's what it was, a year ago. When the bank was threatening foreclosure after my dad's death, left my mom with a mountain of debt and a terrible credit score. It was my name, my savings, and my pristine credit that had saved this place. I was the primary signatory on the refinanced mortgage. My mother and Rachel were listed, legally, as nothing more than residents. I had stepped in to keep a roof over our heads, a roof they were now politely, calmly, trying to kick me out from under. Rachel finally looked up, her big brown eyes glistening with practiced tears. She reached across the table and put her soft, manicured hand on my arm. "Oh, Megan, don't make it sound so dramatic," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "It's just for a little while. You have so many friends. You could stay with Sarah, couldn't you? Just for a bit. I feel so broken. I just need my mom. I need my home. Her touch felt like a brand. I pulled my arm away, the motion sharper than I intended. The sheer, calculated audacity of it stole my breath. They had discussed this. They had planned this. This dinner was not a conversation. It was a verdict. They had weighed my contribution, my stability, and my presence against Rachel's dramatic, self-inflicted chaos. And I had been found wanting. I pushed my chair back from the table, the legs scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. The sound was satisfyingly violent. "I need some air," I mumbled, not looking at either of them. I walked through the living room, past the sofa I paid for and the television I had mounted on the wall, and pushed open the sliding glass door to the back porch. The October air was cold and sharp, biting at my exposed skin. It was a welcome shock to my system. I wrapped my arms around myself and stared out into the darkness of the backyard. The motion sensor light flickered on, illuminating the small, neat patch of lawn I mowed every Sunday morning, the flower beds I had weeded just last weekend. The neighbor's kitchen light cast a warm, yellow rectangle onto the grass, a portrait of a family I wasn't a part of. The wind rustled the dying leaves in the big oak tree, a dry, whispering sound that sounded like mockery. I had poured my life, my money, and my security into this place. I had sacrificed trips, savings, and a social life to make the hefty monthly payments, all under the guise of it being my familial duty. And for what? To be told to pack a bag so my sister could have the bigger room. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in passive aggression. They treated me like a ghost in my own home. My mother spoke to me only in clipped, polite sentences about household logistics. Rachel would flit around, humming to herself, carefully avoiding eye contact. She started moving my things out of the master bathroom, replacing my shampoo with her expensive salon brands, my simple face wash with a 10-step Korean skincare routine that took up the entire counter. They were creating a reality where I was already gone, and I was expected to simply accept it. Then, the text message arrived. I was at my desk at work, staring at a spreadsheet, when my phone buzzed. It was from my mother. "Rachel is feeling much more settled. I think it would be best if you could be moved out by the end of the month. Rachel will handle things from here." I read the message once, twice, 10 times. Rachel will handle things from here. The casual cruelty of it, the dismissal of everything I had done, was breathtaking. There was no discussion, no compromise, just a deadline. An eviction notice delivered via text message. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, my vision blurring with a hot, furious wave of emotion, rage, betrayal, and a profound, bottomless sense of hurt. For a moment, I considered fighting. I could spell out the legal realities, remind them whose name was on the loan, threaten to sell the house from under them. But then a different feeling began to crystallize, cold and hard and perfectly clear. It was a feeling of pure, unadulterated resolve. They thought I was a pushover, a dependable, quiet resource to be used and then discarded. They had forgotten who held all the cards. My thumbs moved deliberately as I typed out a reply. It was short, simple, agreeable. "Okay, we'll see how she handles it." I didn't wait for a response. I put my phone on silent. For the rest of the day, I worked with a strange, ferocious focus. That night, I went home and began to pack. It wasn't a frantic, emotional process. It was silent, methodical, and cold. I started with my closet, folding my clothes into neat, precise squares and placing them in boxes. I packed my books, running my fingers over the spines of stories that had been my friends through lonely nights. I took down my photos, leaving pale rectangles on the walls. With each item I packed, I felt a layer of my old self sloughing away the dutiful daughter, the supportive sister, the fool. They watched me from the doorway of my room, my mother's arms crossed, Rachel looking on with a pained, sanctimonious expression. They said nothing. They didn't offer to help. They just watched as I systematically erased myself from the house I had saved. On the last day, As I was clearing out my desk in the small office nook, my fingers brushed against a thick manila folder. I pulled it out. Inside, pristine and official, was a copy of the mortgage refinancing agreement. I scanned the pages, the dense legal text a familiar language to me from my job in finance. And there it was, on the final page, my signature, bold and clear, under the heading, Primary Borrower. My mother's name was nowhere near it. She had signed a separate residency agreement, a document with no financial liability. I held the papers in my hand. This wasn't just a document. It was a weapon. It was the foundation of the entire house, the legal bedrock they had chosen to ignore. They had kicked me out, but they had forgotten to take the ground with them. I carefully slid the folder into my briefcase, along with my laptop and work files. It was the last thing I packed. As I carried my final box out to my car, a single thought echoed in my mind, a quiet, steady drumbeat beneath the surface of my calm exterior. It was a promise to myself. If they think I'm useless, if they believe my only value was the money I provided, then I will let them have exactly what they asked for. I will let them try to live without me. The plan wasn't born in a flash of anger. It was assembled piece by piece in the sterile quiet of my new one-bedroom apartment, a place that smelled of fresh paint and freedom, the foundation of the trap. However, had been laid 2 years earlier in a stuffy loan officer's office that smelled of weak coffee and desperation, my mother's desperation. I remembered the day with perfect, painful clarity. My mother, Linda, sat across the polished desk from a man named Mr. Henderson, wringing her hands and projecting an aura of tragic, beleaguered widowhood. She spoke in hushed, somber tones about keeping the family home, about the memories held within its walls, about how it was the only thing she had left of my father. It was a masterful performance. She conveniently omitted the part where my father's life insurance had been spent in less than a year on a kitchen remodel, a trip to Italy for her and Rachel, and an endless stream of online shopping deliveries. She also failed to mention the stack of maxed-out credit card bills that had resulted in a credit score so abysmal it was almost impressive. The bank just doesn't understand. She had sighed, dabbing at a non-existent tear. I just need to restructure the loan. A simple refinance. Mr. Henderson, a man with tired eyes who had clearly seen this performance 1,000 times before, had looked at her credit report and then at me. Ma'am, with this debt-to-income ratio and this credit history, no bank is going to refinance your loan. I'm sorry. That was my cue. I had been sitting silently beside her, my own financial records tucked neatly into a portfolio on my lap. I was the solution, the responsible one, the one with a decade of perfect credit, a healthy savings account, and a stable, well-paying job. My mother turned to me, her eyes pleading. Megan, honey, you wouldn't let them take our home, would you? It's for the family. Rachel, who was there for moral support, had chimed in right on schedule. It's the right thing to do. Megan, we have to protect Mom. Protect her from the consequences of her own actions. She meant they weren't asking for help. They were demanding a bailout. I was hesitant, my gut screaming at me that this was a terrible idea, that I was tying my financial future to an anchor of their making, but the pressure, the lifetime of conditioning to be the good daughter, was immense. So I agreed, on one condition that my name, and my name alone, was on the new mortgage. I framed it as a way to simplify the process, to make the bank more comfortable. In reality, it was my only attempt at self-preservation. If I was going to be responsible for the debt, I was going to be in control of the asset. My mother readily agreed. Of course, to her, the details were irrelevant. All that mattered was that the problem was solved. She signed the residency agreement, which legally defined her as a permanent occupant with no financial liability. Without a second glance, Rachel's name was on it as well, a footnote solidifying her status as just another person living in a house I was paying for. I signed the mountain of documents that made me the sole owner and borrower. The house was safe, or rather, my ownership of its debt was secure. For the next 2 years, I paid the mortgage every month, On the first, $2. $800 was automatically withdrawn from my checking account. I also covered the property taxes, which were rolled into an escrow account, and the homeowner's insurance. I paid for the new water heater when the old one burst, and the plumber when the drains backed up. My mother contributed a small, inconsistent amount toward utilities, and Rachel, before she got married and moved out, occasionally bought groceries. They saw my massive monthly contribution not as the sacrifice it was, but as my baseline duty. It was my role. I was the financial bedrock, taken for granted, as essential and as invisible as the concrete foundation poured beneath the house itself. They lived on top of my stability, never once thinking about the weight it carried. This fundamental misunderstanding was the heart of their fatal error. In the weeks leading up to my eviction, I overheard them talking in the kitchen, their voices low and conspiratorial. They were making plans, dividing up the bills they would now have to cover. "I'll put the electric in my name," Rachel had said confidently. "And Mom, you can call the water company. We just need to call the mortgage company and have them switch the billing information to me." I had almost laughed out loud. It was so beautifully, tragically naive. They thought the mortgage was like a Netflix subscription, a simple matter of swapping out one credit card for another. They had no concept of the legally binding contract I had signed. They didn't understand that the bank, the entity to whom I owed hundreds of thousands of dollars, didn't know or care who Rachel was. The lender had a contract with one person, Megan Blake. I was the only one they would ever speak to. Now, sitting on the floor of my new apartment, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating the room, I examined that contract again. I had spent my career in financial risk management. Reading the fine print was second nature to me. The document I had once seen as a burden now looked like a beautifully intricate schematic for my revenge. I scrolled through the clauses, my lips a thin, tight line. Section 5, late payments, a 15-day grace period. After that, a late fee of 5% of the overdue amount was assessed. Section 7, default. If a payment was more than 30 days late, I would be officially in default. A formal notice of intent to accelerate would be mailed to the property address. After 60 days, the default would be reported to all 3 major credit bureaus. After 90 days of non-payment, the lender had the right to initiate foreclosure proceedings. 90 days, a 3-month countdown to detonation. I pulled up the residency agreement my mother had signed, and there it was, the key to the entire trap. As the primary, non-owning resident, she was the one who would be named in any legal action related to the physical property. The bank would pursue me, Megan Blake, for the monetary debt. My credit would take the hit, but the legal notices, the sheriff's summons, the final, humiliating eviction order, all of that would be served to the occupants of the house. To my mother, Linda Blake, I was financially on the hook, but she was physically in the crosshairs. A part of me, a deeply buried, well-trained part, recoiled. I didn't want to make my mother homeless. The goal wasn't to destroy them. I told myself it was to make them understand, to make them feel the weight of what they had thrown away. I wanted them to panic. I wanted them to scramble. I wanted them to call the bank and be met with a polite, impenetrable wall of corporate policy that told them, "We're sorry. We can only speak to Ms. Blake." I wanted them to finally, for the first time, appreciate the security I had provided by having it ripped away. I closed my laptop, the conflict churning inside me. Maybe it was too much. Maybe it was cruel. I paced the small living room, the memory of my mother's pleading face in that office warring with the cold fury her text message had ignited. And then I remembered something else. It was from the week before I moved out. I had come home from a long day at work, exhausted and emotionally drained from the tension in the house. Rachel was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter I had chosen, sipping from a glass of wine from a bottle that cost more than my weekly groceries. She was on the phone with one of her friends, laughing, her voice light and carefree. "No, Mom's so much happier now," she'd said, twirling a strand of her hair. "It's just so much more peaceful here without all the drama." She paused, listening to her friend. I stood in the hallway, hidden in the shadows, listening to my own erasure. Oh, Megan, Rachel had laughed. A tinkling, dismissive sound. She'll be fine. She couldn't do anything without Mom. Anyway, she's always needed someone to tell her what to do. That was it. That was the memory that burned away any lingering hesitation, the condescension, the utter, galling ignorance. She, who had failed at everything she'd ever tried, who had come crawling back home with nothing, was passing judgment on me, the one who had built the very ground she stood on. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a utility, a function, and they had decided my function was complete. I sat back down at my laptop, my movements calm and deliberate. I looked at the wine glass in her hand in my memory, a symbol of the life she was living at my expense. They thought I couldn't do anything without them. I was about to do more than they could possibly imagine. The first step was the easiest. It required a 10-minute phone call, a steady voice, and a complete suppression of emotion. I made the call during my lunch break, sitting in my car in the corporate parking garage, the engine off, the only sound the quiet hum of the building's ventilation system, when the polite, cheerful voice of a customer service representative from the bank answered. I was ready. My voice was calm, professional, the same one I used with my own clients when discussing multi-million-dollar insurance policies. "Good afternoon," I began, giving her my name and loan number. "I'd like to cancel my automatic payment arrangement for the mortgage, effective immediately." There was a pause, the clicking of a keyboard on the other end. "Certainly. Ms. Blake, may I ask the reason for the change today?" "I'm restructuring my finances," I said, the lie smooth and practiced. "I'll be moving to manual payments for the foreseeable future." It was a perfectly reasonable, utterly boring explanation. It invited no further questions. The representative dutifully read from her script, confirmed my identity with a few security questions, and processed the request. "All right, Ms. Blake, that's all taken care of. Your automatic payments have been canceled. Just a reminder that your next payment is due on the 1st of November. "I'm aware," I said. "Thank you for your help." I ended the call and sat in the silence for a full minute, the phone resting in my lap. A single, critical wire had been cut. The life support system I had provided for that house was now, officially, offline. There was no triumph, no surge of adrenaline, just the quiet satisfaction of a task completed. The second step was about building a firewall. That same afternoon, I walked into a different financial institution, a small, local credit union, completely unaffiliated with my previous bank. I opened a new checking and savings account. The process was mundane, filled with paperwork and the forced pleasantries of new customer onboarding. But to me, it was a declaration of independence. I filled out a new direct deposit form and submitted it to my company's HR department before I left the office that day. My next paycheck, and every paycheck after it, would be routed to this new, untainted account. It was a financial fortress, a place my family's chaos could not touch. My money was now truly my own. I spent an hour that evening online, methodically rerouting my own life, my new rent payment, my car insurance, my utility bills, all tied to this new account. It was a quiet digital exodus. The third and final step was the physical withdrawal. I had already moved my boxes, but a few remnants of my life remained. I chose to go back on a Tuesday night, knowing my mother had her book club and Rachel would be out with friends, desperately trying to reassemble her social life. I used my key for the last time, the lock turning with a familiar, grating sound. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. It felt hollow, occupied by strangers. Rachel had completely infested my old room. Her clothes were strewn over the chair where I used to read, and a half-empty wine glass sat on my bedside table, a faint red ring staining the wood. The sight didn't anger me. It simply affirmed the correctness of my actions. I walked through the house like a ghost, a forensic inspector gathering final impressions. I collected my last few belongings, a toothbrush I'd forgotten in the guest bathroom, a charging cable behind the sofa, a single earring that had fallen under a dresser, I put them in my purse without sentiment. Before I left, I placed my house key on the polished surface of the oak dining table, the one I had bought for them. Beside it, I laid a single, folded piece of notepaper. On it, I had written 7 simple words in my neatest, clearest script. Thank you for teaching me how to live on my own. The irony was a private, bitter pleasure. I didn't slam the door on my way out. I pulled it shut gently until I heard the soft, final click of the latch. I did not look back. 2 days later, the confirmation of their worldview appeared on my phone screen. I was scrolling through social media, a mindless habit. When I saw it, it was a photo posted by Rachel. She and my mother were on the living room sofa, smiling, their heads tilted together in a perfect performance of familial bliss. Rachel was holding a glass of white wine, my mother a cup of tea. The lighting was warm and golden. It looked like a stock photo for a home insurance ad. The caption was nauseatingly sweet. Reunited, and it feels so good. So blessed to have my mom and my home to come back to. Finally getting back to normal. No more drama. My thumb hovered over the screen. It was the no more drama that was the masterstroke of cruelty. I was the drama. My presence. My expectations of basic respect. My silent, steady financial support, that was the drama they were so relieved to be free of. I scrolled down to the comments, already knowing what I would find. There it was. From my mother's account, finally. Some peace in our house. Love you, sweetie. A dry, mirthless laugh escaped my lips in the silence of my apartment. I looked around at my own unpacked boxes, my bare walls, my life temporarily in disarray. They were celebrating their peace, a peace they hadn't earned and couldn't afford. I took a screenshot of the post, of the caption, of my mother's comment. I saved it to a folder on my phone I labeled Receipts. Then I closed the app. Their peace had an expiration date. It was the 1st of the month. The last week of October passed in a blur of work and settling in. I bought a new coffee maker. I hung curtains. I went for a run every morning in a new park. I was building a new life, while the demolition of their old one was quietly proceeding on schedule. On the morning of November 1st, a Friday, I felt a flicker of anticipation. At 9:02 a.m., it arrived an automated email from my old bank. The subject line was Stark Mortgage Payment Overdue. I opened it. It was a polite, formulaic reminder that my payment for loan 743B881 had not been received. I read the email, a small, cold smile touching my lips. I moved it to my archives. The first domino had fallen. I knew they wouldn't notice immediately. The bank's automated alerts usually took a day or two to process. It was Sunday evening when my phone buzzed with the text I had been waiting for. It was from Rachel. Hey, weird question. Mom got an email saying the mortgage payment was late. Did you forget to make it? Is there some kind of system error? I stared at the message, letting the words sink in. The casual assumption of my error. The utter lack of comprehension. They still thought I was part of their system, a cog that had simply malfunctioned. My reply was swift, deliberate, and surgically precise. I typed it out, checked it for tone. It had to be neutral, factual, and hit send. No, there is no system error. The system is working perfectly. The only difference is that I am no longer in it. I watched the 3 dots appear and disappear as she typed a reply. I didn't wait to see what it was. I had no interest in her panic, her confusion, or her inevitable anger. Their emotional reaction was no longer my concern. I opened her contact information. My thumb hovered over the option at the bottom of the screen. With a firm, steady press, I blocked her number. Then I pulled up my mother's contact and did the exact same thing. A profound silence descended. It wasn't the fake, fragile peace they had posted about on social media. It was real. It was earned. And it was all mine. The first month after I blocked their numbers was quiet. On my end, it was a period of adjustment and newfound peace. In their world, it was the deceptive calm before the storm. I knew, with the certainty of a financial analyst watching a market trend, that the mechanisms I had set in motion were grinding forward, indifferent to their ignorance. Around the 30-day mark, the first official domino fell. An envelope would have arrived at the house, addressed to me. Inside, on crisp bank letterhead, would be the first late payment notice. It wouldn't be aggressive, not yet. It would be a polite but firm notification of a missed payment, detailing the original amount due, $2,800 plus the newly assessed late fee of $140. I could picture their reaction perfectly. My mother, confused and indignant, holding the letter as if it were a personal insult. Rachel, ever the problem solver of problems she created, snatching it from her hand. It must be a mistake, she'd insist. The system hasn't updated with my information yet. I'll call them and sort it out. And so began Rachel's futile crusade against the impenetrable fortress of federal banking regulations. I didn't need to hear the frantic voicemail she undoubtedly left on my now-blocked number. I could script them in my head. First, she would have called the bank's 1-800 number, navigating the automated menu with rising frustration. After 20 minutes on hold, listening to distorted classical music, she would have finally reached a live person, a call center employee in another state earning minimum wage. "Hi, my name is Rachel Miller," she would begin, her voice dripping with the forced sweetness she used when she wanted something. "I'm calling about the mortgage for 123 Oak Street. There seems to be a mistake with the last payment." The employee's response would be polite, practiced, and absolute. "I see the account here. Can you please confirm the name of the primary borrower for me?" "Well, it's under my sister's name, Megan Blake, but I'm handling things now." "I understand. And are you an authorized user on this account?" "Ms. Miller." "No, but she moved out. I live here with my mother. I just need to give you my payment information." "I'm very sorry, Ms. Miller, but due to federal privacy laws, I am unable to discuss any details of this loan with anyone other than the primary borrower, Ms. Megan Blake. Is she available to speak with me?" The conversation would end there. She would have hung up, fuming. She would have tried again. Perhaps thinking a different representative would yield a different result. She would have called the original mortgage broker who had set up the loan 2 years ago, only to be told the same thing: my relationship is with the lender and the signatory. "Rachel, I can't help you." She was a legal nonentity, a ghost haunting a house she had no claim to, and the reality of her powerlessness was beginning to dawn on her. As November bled into December, the second payment was missed. The second domino fell. Much louder this time. A new letter arrived, this one via certified mail, requiring a signature. It would not be polite. This would be the notice of default and intent to accelerate. The language would be stark, legalistic, and terrifying. Words like delinquency, breach of contract, and foreclosure would leap off the page. It would inform them that the loan was now in serious default, the total amount due having swelled with another month's payment and more compounded late fees. It was the moment the bank stopped asking and started warning. This was when my mother, having realized Rachel's efforts were useless, turned to the only avenue she had left: email. The subject line was simply, "Megan." The message itself was a torrent of panicked, self-serving accusations. "Megan, I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, but it stops now. We are getting threatening letters from the bank. Do you have any idea what this is doing to my stress levels? You are going to ruin my credit. You can't do this to your own family. You can't do this to your own house." I read the email over my morning coffee in my quiet, peaceful apartment. My credit, my stress levels, your house. She still didn't get it. She saw the house as hers, the consequences as hers, but the responsibility as mine. My fingers flew across my keyboard, my reply a missile of cold, hard truth. "It stopped being my house the moment you told me to leave it. The bank will only speak to the person whose name is on the loan. This is the situation you and Rachel chose. I suggest you consult the residency agreement you signed." I hit send, and then immediately created a filter to send any future emails from her address directly to the trash. I was done. My part in the conversation was over. With no way to reach me, they turned to the court of public opinion. Rachel began crafting her narrative, spinning a tale of woe to her friends and anyone who would listen. The version I heard, through a mutual acquaintance who called me, concerned, was that her cruel, unstable sister had suffered some sort of breakdown, abandoning her family and her responsibilities out of pure spite, leaving her poor, widowed mother to face homelessness alone. I was painted as the villain, she and my mother as the blameless victims. For a while, it worked. Sympathy poured in. But their private narrative was on a collision course with public record. Sometime in early January, after 90 days of non-payment, the bank's lawyers made their move. A process server, a grim-faced man in a cheap suit, walked up the driveway and taped a legal notice to the front door. It was a large, brightly colored sheet of paper designed to be seen, to create public shame. It was my old neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who sent me the photo. She was a sweet, sharp-eyed woman in her 70s who had watched me grow up. Her text arrived without preamble. It was just a crystal-clear picture of the front door of my old house. Taped squarely in the middle was a shocking pink sheet of paper. The words at the top, in huge, black, all-caps letters, were unmistakable: Notice of Trustees Sale. It listed the property address, the default amount, the trustee's name, and a date and time for a public auction. It was the financial equivalent of a death certificate. Beneath the photo, Mrs. Gable had typed a simple, 4-word question: "Is this yours?" My reply was even simpler: "Not anymore." This public humiliation was the catalyst for Rachel's final, desperate, and self-sabotaging act, a GoFundMe campaign. She posted it on all her social media, a last-ditch effort to crowdsource her way out of a problem of her own making. The page featured a soft-focus photo of her and my mother looking forlornly out the living room window. The title was dramatic: "Help me save my mother's home." The description was a masterwork of manipulative prose, filled with poignant talk of cherished family memories, my father's legacy, and my mother's fragile health. And then, she made her fatal mistake. In an attempt to explain the situation and paint me as the villain, she wrote the unvarnished, disastrous truth. My mother's eldest daughter, the legal homeowner, has abandoned the property and is refusing to make the mortgage payments, leaving us to face foreclosure alone. We are trying to raise the funds to pay the bank what is owed. She thought it would generate sympathy. Instead, it invited scrutiny. The comment section, which she had foolishly left open, quickly turned from a trickle of condolences to a flood of pointed questions. Wait a minute. One person wrote, "If her sister is the legal homeowner, how can you legally collect money for her debt? Wouldn't that money just go to the sister?" Another chimed in, "Why would the homeowner just walk away from her own house? This story doesn't make sense." Someone else, clearly more internet savvy, posted, "Property records are public. A quick search shows Megan Blake is the sole owner. This GoFundMe seems sketchy." Rachel's carefully constructed narrative of victimhood was being publicly dismantled by strangers on the internet. Her plea for help had become a public interrogation. She was trying to fight a financial fire with a bucket of gasoline, and the entire neighborhood, both real and virtual, had a front-row seat to watch her get burned. My professional life is a world of calculated risks and quantifiable consequences. I am a financial risk manager for a major insurance underwriter. My job is to stare into the abyss of potential disasters, market collapses, natural catastrophes, massive corporate fraud, and put a precise dollar amount on them. I spend my days reading the fine print of contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, identifying loopholes, and creating strategies to mitigate loss. In short, my expertise lies in understanding the precise, brutal mechanics of how things fall apart. The irony was not lost on me. While my family was experiencing the chaotic, emotional freefall of their own making, I was calmly managing it like any other high-risk asset on my books. The two worlds collided on a Wednesday afternoon. The news, as it always does, had traveled through the office grapevine. The GoFundMe campaign, a public spectacle of financial illiteracy and family dysfunction, had been seen by a few colleagues. I was at my desk, deep in a coverage analysis for a new shipping client. When my office phone chimed, it was my boss, David. "Megan, could you pop into my office for a moment?" His voice was even, but it was not his usual tone. I saved my work and walked the short distance to his glass-walled corner office. David was a good boss, fair, logical, and allergic to drama. He gestured for me to sit down, his expression carefully neutral. "Close the door. Would you?" I did. My heart rate remained perfectly steady. "Look, Megan," he began, leaning forward on his desk. "I don't want to pry into your personal life, but something has come to my attention, and I have to ask. I heard a rumor that your house is being foreclosed on. Is everything all right?" His concern was genuine, but it was also professional. A financial risk manager whose own finances were imploding was not a good look for the company. I offered him a small, reassuring smile, the kind of smile I used when telling a client their policy didn't cover an act of God. "Everything is perfectly fine, David," I said, my voice calm and measured. "And to be more accurate, the house that my family occupies, which is legally in my name, is indeed in foreclosure. It's a situation I am actively managing." He raised his eyebrows, intrigued. He was a numbers guy. He appreciated precision. Managing. "It was a family asset with non-performing residents," I explained, using the detached language of my profession. "I made the strategic decision to divest. The foreclosure is simply the legal mechanism for that divestment. It's a contained financial event, and I can assure you it has zero impact on my work." He leaned back in his chair, a slow grin spreading across his face. He understood. He saw the logic, the cold calculus behind it. Understood. "Blake, just checking. As you were." As I walked back to my desk, my colleague Sarah intercepted me by the coffee machine. She was a friend, or as close to a friend as one gets at work. "I heard what David called you in for," she said, her voice low, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and fascination. "My God, Megan, are you okay? Don't you regret it, even a little?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the bitter warmth fortify me. Regret is an unproductive emotion. "Sarah," I replied, looking her directly in the eye, "it's for people who act without a plan. I have a plan." Back at my desk, the universe seemed intent on testing that plan. A new email had appeared in my inbox. The sender was an email address I didn't recognize. A jumble of letters and numbers. The subject line was one word, my. It was from Rachel. She had created a new email account to bypass my block. The message was a chaotic masterpiece of desperation, a digital manifestation of her unraveling mind. "Megan, I am begging you. You have to stop this. I went to the bank in person. I had the money for one payment from the GoFundMe before they froze it. I was trying to do the right thing and they treated me like a criminal. They said they couldn't even acknowledge that you had a loan with them. The auction date is set. Mom isn't eating. She just cries all day. This is killing her. Can't you just call them or sign a piece of paper? Just something that says I can make a payment to stop the process. Just one payment to get them off our backs so we can figure this out. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. I never should have listened to Mom. I was just so lost after the divorce and I wanted to come home. Please, Megan, don't do this to us." I read the email twice, my expression unchanging. Her apology was worthless. A last-ditch attempt at manipulation. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry for the consequences. She still believed there was a magical piece of paper, a simple phone call that could undo the legal avalanche she was standing under. She was asking me to help her patch a hole in a dam I had just spent 3 months dynamiting. My response was not to her. Replying would be engaging in her drama, validating her plea. My actions were, as always, strategic and directed at the source of power. I clicked forward, in the to field. I typed the email address of the representative in the bank's loss mitigation department I had been assigned, a woman named Ms. Albright. I attached Rachel's frantic email. My own message was brief, professional, and utterly devastating. Subject: unauthorized third-party contact /loan 743B881. Dear Ms. Albright. For the official record on my account, please see the attached communication received today. This is to formally notify you of an unauthorized third party attempting to access loan information and interfere with the current legal proceedings. I do not authorize this individual, Rachel Miller, to act on my behalf or receive any information regarding this account. Please ensure the file is noted accordingly to prevent any potential fraud. Thank you. Megan Blake, Financial Risk Manager. I hit send. It was the corporate equivalent of calling in an airstrike on my own position. By flagging Rachel's contact as a fraudulent, unauthorized attempt, I was forcing the bank's hand. A simple delinquency was now a potential security issue. Bureaucracies, especially financial ones, do not take kindly to such things. The result was immediate and predictable. 3 days later, I received a notification I was CC'd on an internal bank email, a standard courtesy to the borrower. The subject line was Escalation and Counsel Engagement, Loan 743B881. The email was from Ms. Albright to a senior partner at the law firm the bank retained for foreclosure cases. The message was simple. Please see the file attached. The asset at 123 Oak Street is now being formally assigned to your office for expedited legal processing due to mitigating circumstances. The file had been kicked out of the administrative slowness of the loss mitigation department and thrown into the high-speed, no-nonsense world of corporate lawyers. The game was over. There were no more chances to figure things out. There was only the inevitable, legal conclusion. That evening, as I was leaving the office, my phone buzzed. A text message from a number I didn't recognize. The preview on my lock screen was all I needed to see. It was from my mother, using someone else's phone. You are destroying this family. I stared at the 6 words on the screen. There was no anger, no sadness, not even a flicker of guilt. There was only a quiet, profound clarity. I slid my thumb across the screen, dismissing the notification without opening the message. I didn't reply. That family destroyed itself when they decided I was disposable. They just hadn't realized that the person they threw away was the only one holding the entire structure up. The day was an ordinary Tuesday in late March, the kind with a high, thin sky that made the world look stark and unforgiving. I hadn't intended to go there. My new route to work was deliberately chosen to avoid my old neighborhood, to sever the geographical tie as cleanly as I had severed the financial and emotional ones. But that morning, a traffic accident had shut down the freeway, and the navigation app on my phone, in its infinite, impartial wisdom, had rerouted me. It sent me down the familiar tree-lined streets of my past. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I recognized the curve of the road, the specific crack in the pavement near the corner, the overgrown rose bushes in Mrs. Gable's yard. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were a tourist visiting a place I'd once seen in a photograph. And then, I made the final turn onto Oak Street. I told myself I would just drive past, a ghost in a metal shell, unseen and unaffected. But you can't unsee a foreclosure sign. It was the first thing I saw, a brutal slash of fluorescent orange against the pale green of the spring lawn. It was professionally printed, brutally efficient, staked into the very ground I used to mow. The words "Foreclosure Auction" were printed in thick, black, sans serif letters, followed by a date and a time. It was an advertisement for the end of their world. My foot instinctively eased off the accelerator, the car slowing to a crawl. And that's when I saw them. It was a tableau of utter defeat. Rachel was on the front porch, the same porch where my boxes had been piled. Her shoulders slumped, her body racked with visible sobs. She was wearing sweatpants and a stained hoodie, her carefully constructed image of effortless perfection completely shattered. She looked small and lost. My mother wasn't on the porch with her. She was sitting in the passenger seat of her car, which was parked in the driveway. She was staring straight ahead, her face a pale, slack mask of despair. She couldn't even bring herself to stand on the property that was being ripped from her grasp. She was a passenger in her own ruin. I didn't stop. I kept the car moving, my gaze fixed forward, but my eyes flickered to the rearview mirror. the scene shrank. Framed in the small rectangle of glass, the garish sign, the weeping sister, the catatonic mother, and then it happened. My mother's head turned, her eyes, even in the tiny, distant reflection, found mine. There was no mistaking it. She saw me. She saw my dark blue sedan, my silhouette behind the wheel. For a single, suspended moment, everything stopped. The engine's hum, the rustle of the trees, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. In that shared glance through a mirror, everything was communicated. There was no anger left in her eyes, no defiance. There was only a look of profound, devastating, and complete understanding. She finally knew. She knew that I had done this, and she knew why. She knew that this was the inevitable, logical conclusion to the choice she had made at the dinner table all those months ago. I saw Rachel look up then, her tear-streaked face contorting as she recognized my car. Her mouth opened, as if to scream my name, but I was already accelerating, turning the corner at the end of the street. The house, the sign, and the two women who had erased me from their lives vanished from my mirror. They were gone. I drove the rest of the way to my apartment in a state of preternatural calm. There was no giddy rush of victory, no lingering pang of guilt. There was only the quiet, cold hum of a complex equation that had finally been solved. The variables had been isolated, the operations performed, and the result was exactly as predicted. They had told me they didn't need me, and now, the house they thought was theirs had no one, no owner, no protector. No one to answer the bank's calls. It was an orphan, just as they had tried to make me. I parked in my assigned spot and walked up to my small, clean apartment. Inside, there was silence. Not the hollow, tense silence of my old house, but a peaceful, chosen silence. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window that looked out over the city skyline. This was my space. No one could order me out of it. No one could make me feel like a guest in my own life. Here, I was the sole signatory. I was the only name on the lease. The phone rang late that afternoon. The caller ID showed a blocked number, but I had a feeling. I answered, my voice neutral. "This is Megan Blake." "Ms. Blake, this is Caroline Albright from the bank's REO department." Her voice was professional, devoid of any emotion. "The real estate-owned department. The end of the line. I'm calling to inform you that as of this morning, the property at 123 Oak Street has been officially repossessed by the lender. The asset is now bank-owned." "I'm aware of the proceedings," I said calmly. "Of course," she said. "As the former borrower in good standing prior to the default, we are required to extend you the first opportunity to repurchase the property before it goes to public auction. It's a formality, but I have to ask, would you have any interest in acquiring the asset?" I looked out my window at the sprawling city. I thought of the fluorescent sign on the lawn, of Rachel's crumpled form, of my mother's vacant eyes in the rearview mirror. I thought of the weight of the last 2 years, the sacrifice, the betrayal, and I thought of the power of a name on a dotted line, the power they had so foolishly underestimated. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a smile of grim, absolute satisfaction. The final piece of the plan clicked into place. "That depends." "Ms. Albright," I replied, my voice perfectly level. "Let me see the price." 2 months passed. The house sat empty, the lawn growing shaggy, the foreclosure sign fading slightly in the sun. The public auction was a legal formality, a ghost proceeding. There were no other serious bidders. The bank had set the opening bid at the outstanding debt plus legal fees, a number far too high for a property that now had a distressed history. As expected, no one bid. The property officially reverted to the bank. Then, my offer, the one I had submitted through my lawyer, was accepted. It was a lowball offer, an aggressive, almost insulting number. It was just over half of what I had originally owed on the mortgage. But for the bank, it was a clean, quick, guaranteed sale. It allowed them to close a defaulted file and recoup at least some of their losses without the hassle of listing the property with an agent. For them, It was good business. For me, it was the punchline to a very long, very cruel joke. The signing took place at a sterile title company office downtown. The documents were laid out on a long, polished table. It was just me, my lawyer, and a title agent. There was no drama, no emotion. It was a simple, quiet transaction. I picked up the pen. It felt impossibly light in my hand. I thought of the crushing weight of responsibility I had felt signing the first set of papers 2 years ago. The feeling of being trapped. This was different, with a few smooth, effortless strokes of ink. I signed my name, Megan Blake, the name of the owner, the only name that had ever truly mattered. The stroke of the pen was as quiet and as final as the closing of a heavy door, locking the past away for good. The new key felt foreign in my hand, its edges sharp and unfamiliar compared to the worn brass of the old one. It had been 8 months since I had last walked out the front door, 8 months that felt like a lifetime. I stood on the porch for a long moment, listening to the quiet rhythm of the suburban street, a distant lawnmower, the chatter of birds in the old oak tree. The air smelled of damp earth and the promise of summer. I inserted the key into the lock. It slid in smoothly, and with a clean, decisive thud, the deadbolt retracted. I pushed the door open, and the smell hit me first. It was the scent of a place uninhabited, stale, dusty, with the faint, phantom smell of my mother's potpourri clinging to the air like a ghost. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the sudden, cavernous silence. The house was not empty. They had been forced to leave in a hurry, and in their haste, they had left behind the things that were too heavy, too old, or too worthless to take. The heavy oak dining table, the scene of the crime, still stood in its place. Its surface was scarred with new scratches, a testament to their carelessness. On the walls of the living room, pale, dust-free rectangles marked the spots where my mother's collection of family photos had once hung, the ghosts of smiling faces of my graduation, of Rachel's wedding, of a family that had only ever truly existed on glossy photo paper stared back at me from the negative space. The old beige refrigerator, the one I had always hated, hummed quietly in the kitchen, a lonely, persistent sound in the profound stillness. I walked from room to room, a solitary queen surveying a conquered castle. There were no piles of Rachel's clothes, no scent of her cloying lotions, no half-empty wine glasses left on countertops. There were no passive-aggressive notes on the fridge, no sounds of the television blaring, no strained, tense conversations slicing through the air. The oppressive weight of their presence was gone. All that remained was me and the quiet, breathing soul of the house itself. The silence was absolute. It was the sound of my victory. In the dining room, tucked away in a dusty corner, was an old ceramic vase I had made in a high school pottery class. My mother had always kept it, more out of a sense of obligation than any real appreciation. It was lopsided and imperfect. I picked it up, wiping the dust from its surface with my thumb. I took it to the kitchen, filled it with water, and carried it outside. From a massively overgrown rosebush by the porch, one I had planted years ago, I clipped a single, perfect, white rose. I brought it inside and placed the vase in the exact center of the scarred oak table, a single point of life and beauty in a room full of ghosts. It was my first act of reclamation. I went through the house and threw open every window, pushing up the sashes that had been painted shut with apathy. Fresh, clean air flooded the stale rooms, carrying the scent of cut grass from a neighboring yard. I stood in the center of the living room, closed my eyes, and just breathed. The feeling that settled over me wasn't the hot, triumphant spike of revenge. Revenge felt loud, and this was a quiet, internal shift. It was a feeling of profound, unshakable justice. It was the feeling of a world righting itself, of an equation finally being balanced. The property and the responsibility for it were finally aligned. The house belonged to the person who had paid for it, in every conceivable way. The scales, which had been so unjustly tipped, were now perfectly peacefully level. That evening, back in my apartment amidst my own boxes, I performed one last piece of business. I opened my laptop and composed a final, brief email to Caroline Albright at the bank. Subject: Re-closing documents, 123 Oak Street. Dear Miss Albright, thank you for your assistance in this matter. I appreciate the prompt and efficient processing. Regards, Megan Blake. It was a simple, professional courtesy, a quiet closing of a file, and a final, definitive end to a chapter of my life defined by that bank and that loan. After sending it, I opened a new file, a spreadsheet titled Personal Budget 2.0. I deleted the line item for apartment rent. In its place, I created new entries: mortgage, property tax escrow, homeowner's insurance. I typed in the new numbers. The monthly mortgage payment was nearly $1,500 less than what I had been paying before. The betrayal that had forced me out had, through a series of cold, logical steps, resulted in a massive financial windfall. I had not only reclaimed the house, I had acquired it at a discount forged in their foolishness. A few weeks later, after the house had been professionally deep cleaned and I had begun the slow process of moving my own things in, I had lunch with my work colleague, Sarah. She had followed the saga with a kind of horrified fascination. "I still can't believe you're moving back in," she said, shaking her head as she picked at her salad. "After everything that happened there, why would you choose to live with all those bad memories?" It was a fair question. It was what anyone on the outside would think, that the house was tainted, haunted by the drama and the pain, but they were wrong. "I'm not living with the bad memories," I told her, my voice even and sure. "I'm replacing them. Before, I was just a resident with financial liability. I was paying for a house that was never allowed to be mine. Now, it's actually mine. Every floorboard, every nail, every blade of grass. The deed has my name on it, and only my name. I'm not running from what happened. I'm occupying the territory where it happened. That's a completely different thing." She looked at me, a new understanding in her eyes. It wasn't about the property, it was about the principle. On the first Saturday after I had fully moved in, I unpacked the last box. Inside was a small, custom-ordered plaque I had been saving. It was made of dark walnut, with simple, elegant white script engraved on its surface. I took a hammer and a small nail and walked into the newly painted kitchen. The walls were a clean, calming slate gray. The old humming refrigerator was gone, replaced by a sleek, new stainless steel model. I chose a spot on the wall right next to the door leading to the dining room, a place where I would see it every single day. I hammered the nail in with 2 sharp, satisfying taps. I hung the plaque. It wasn't for them. They would never see it. It wasn't for guests. It was a private monument, a reminder for myself. It read, "Don't forget who paid for peace." The world I had built for myself was quiet, orderly, and walled off. I didn't seek out news of them. I had no desire to peer over my newly constructed fortifications to watch the chaos unfold in the valley below. But information, like water, has a way of seeping through the cracks. It came in trickles at first, from concerned texts from old family friends or hesitant questions from mutual acquaintances who didn't know the full story. I learned that Rachel had moved into the spare room of a friend from her yoga class, a temporary arrangement that was already stretching the definition of temporary. The friend lived in a tiny condo, a significant downgrade from the master suite Rachel had so briefly claimed as her own. I heard that the stability she'd so desperately needed, the stability she had been willing to sacrifice me for, remained stubbornly out of her grasp. She'd found a part-time job as a receptionist at a spa, but she lost it after less than a month. The reason I heard was a vague but telling unreliability. She was too unstable. Her new boss had apparently said, the irony was so thick I could have choked on it. She had manufactured a crisis to solve a problem of her own making, and in the end, she had simply become the crisis itself. These reports were like distant weather forecasts of a storm I was no longer in the path of. I would listen politely, murmur a neutral, "I see," and change the subject. Her life was her problem now. My life consisted of choosing paint colors for the living room, learning how to fix a leaky faucet from a YouTube tutorial, and enjoying the profound luxury of drinking my morning coffee in a silent kitchen that was entirely my own. And then, she escalated. She decided to take her case to the highest court in the modern world, the internet. The news came from Sarah at work, who slid up to my desk one morning, her phone in her hand, her expression a mixture of pity and morbid excitement. "Megan," she said in a conspiratorial whisper, "you have to see this." She showed me the phone. It was a TikTok video, and there was Rachel's face, filling the screen. She had mastered the art of the social media victim. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup. Her eyes were red-rimmed and glistening with unshed tears, and her hair was artfully messy. She was filming in her friend's cramped, beige spare room, a backdrop that screamed, "Displaced refugee." The video was shaky, as if she were too overcome with emotion to hold the phone steady. Her voice, when she spoke, was a masterpiece of controlled anguish. "I don't normally do this," she began, a tear finally escaping and tracing a perfect, glistening path down her cheek. "But I don't know what else to do. My family has been torn apart." She went on to spin a heartbreaking, cinematic tale. She spoke of her beloved childhood home, the place her father had built for them. She talked about her recent, painful divorce and her need to come home to heal. And then she introduced the villain, my sister. She said, her voice cracking, I think something just snapped. She kicked our mom out and she stole our house. She threw everything away for money." She ended the video by looking directly into the camera, her eyes wide and pleading. "I just want my mom to have a home. That's all I want." The video was set to a sad, instrumental piano track. It was shameless, it was brilliant, and it was a complete and utter lie. For a day, it worked. The video went viral in our small city's online community. The comments section was a flood of sympathy and outrage. "That's horrible. Your sister is a monster, praying for you and your mom. How can someone be so cruel to their own family?" Her GoFundMe, which had previously been frozen, was suddenly reinstated and donations started trickling in again. She was Rachel the martyr, and I was Megan the cruel, the heartless sister who had stolen her family home. I watched the video once, my expression unreadable. I felt a flicker of something not anger, but a kind of cold, clinical fascination. It was like watching a specimen under a microscope engage in a complex, but ultimately futile self-preservation ritual. She had built her narrative on a foundation of pure emotion, forgetting that the internet, for all its emotional volatility, also has a deep and abiding love for one thing: facts. The tide turned on the second day. It started with a single comment, buried deep in the sea of sympathy. "This is a really sad story, but something feels off. Has anyone checked the county property records? They're public." That one, simple question was the spark. Within hours, the digital detectives had been mobilized. Someone found the online database for the county assessor's office. They found the deed for 123 Oak Street. They took a screenshot, and they posted it in the comments. There, in stark, undeniable black and white, was the chain of ownership. It showed the original loan, the refinancing, and the final sale. It showed one name, and one name only, on every significant document: Megan Blake. The narrative didn't just shift, it shattered. The comments section transformed from a support group into a public trial, and Rachel was the one in the dock. Wait, a new top comment read, with hundreds of likes. So the sister owned the house the whole time. She saved it from foreclosure and then bought it again after the bank took it. This story just got a lot more interesting. Another user posted a link to the now-defunct GoFundMe page. Look at the original description here. She admitted her sister was the legal homeowner. She was trying to raise money for a house she had no legal claim to. The sympathy evaporated, replaced by a wave of admiration for the villain of Rachel's story. So the sister was paying for everything. They kicked her out, and she just took the payments with her. That's not cruel. That's a power move. Her sister is a freaking genius. Note to self, don't mess with Megan Blake. I watched from my silent, walled-off world as my reputation was laundered by an army of anonymous strangers. I became an unwitting icon of financial literacy, and righteous revenge. Rachel, on the other hand, was eviscerated. She was a fraud, a manipulator, a lazy leech. She tried to delete the negative comments, but they were coming too fast. Within 24 hours of the records being posted, she deleted the video. A day later, her entire TikTok account vanished. Her public relations campaign had imploded, taking her reputation with it. It was 2 weeks after the TikTok disaster that she finally called. It was a Tuesday night. I was on my sofa, reading a book, enjoying the quiet hum of my new dishwasher. An unknown number flashed on my screen. I knew it was her. I let it ring 4 times. Then I answered, my voice flat. Hello? There was a shaky breath on the other end, then a small, broken voice I almost didn't recognize. Megan. I didn't reply. It's me, she whispered. Sister, I'm so sorry. The apology was a wet, pathetic sound, devoid of the confidence and manipulation she had always wielded so expertly. I messed up. I know I messed everything up. I want to come home. The words hung in the air between us. I want to come home. The same phrase she had used when she arrived. A Trojan horse filled with entitlement and chaos. She still didn't get it. She still saw that house, the one I now owned outright, the one I had paid for 3 times over, once with my money, once with my heartbreak, and once with my cold, hard cash, as home, as a place she had a right to. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I felt no anger. The fire of my rage had burned out long ago, leaving behind nothing but cold, hard ash. There was just a vast, quiet emptiness inside me. What home? Rachel, I asked. My voice was quiet, almost conversational, but the question was a shard of ice. Are you talking about the one you tried to take away from me? The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was a silence filled with the weight of a truth she could no longer deny. A checkmate from which there was no escape. I heard a small, choked gasp, and then nothing. I didn't wait for an answer. There was nothing else to say. I pressed the red icon on my screen, ending the call. I placed the phone face down on the cushion beside me. I had won. I had the house, the financial security, the peace. But the feeling that settled over me wasn't the thrill of victory. It was the sterile, hollow quiet of a problem that had been solved, of a threat that had been neutralized. I had won the war. But it was a war I should never have had to fight, and winning, I was beginning to understand, was just another word for being left completely and utterly alone. Autumn arrived that year, not with a sudden chill, but as a slow, golden sigh. The leaves on the old oak tree in my yard turned from green to amber to a deep, burnished copper. I had settled into a rhythm in the house, a quiet cadence of my own making. My mornings were for coffee on the back porch, watching the sun climb over the rooftops. My evenings were for books and the soft glow of a single lamp in the living room. The ghosts had been exorcised, not through any grand ceremony, but through the mundane, repetitive acts of living. I had painted the walls, planted new flowers, and filled the silence with the sounds of my own life. The letter arrived on a cool October afternoon. I found it when I was collecting my mail, tucked between a credit card offer and a home goods catalog. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. It was elegant, looping, and feminine, a script from a bygone era of thank you notes and formal invitations. It looked impossibly delicate, a relic from a past I had surgically removed. My first instinct was to throw it away, to toss it into the recycling bin unopened with the rest of the junk mail. But my hand hesitated. I stood there, by my mailbox, the crisp autumn air on my skin, and felt the weight of that thin paper envelope. Back inside, I placed it on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time. It was the first direct contact I'd had from her since the final, accusatory text message. I made a cup of tea, my movements slow and deliberate, a small ritual to delay the inevitable. Finally, I picked up a knife and slit the envelope open with a careful, precise motion. Inside, there were 2 things: a single, folded sheet of stationery and a small square photograph. I unfolded the letter first. The words, written in my mother's perfect cursive, filled the page. Megan, it began. There was no dear, no term of endearment. I don't know if you will read this. I don't know that I deserve for you to. I have spent the last few months living in a small apartment with your sister. It is clean and it is safe, but it is not a home. I find myself thinking about all the things that make a house a home. The sound of a furnace kicking on in the winter, the way the morning light hits the kitchen floor, the feeling of a solid roof over your head during a storm. For years, I took those things for granted. I thought they were just there. I was wrong. You were there. You were the one making sure the furnace worked, that the mortgage was paid so the light could hit the floor, that the roof was sound. I always saw you as the strong one, the capable one, and because you were strong, I never thought you needed to be protected. I thought you could just handle everything. That was my mistake. It was a terrible, selfish mistake. I was a fool. I listened to Rachel's panic instead of your quiet, steady presence. I chose the squeaking wheel. I forgot that you were the one holding the entire wagon together. You were the foundation, and I let us kick you out. I am so sorry for the blindness that let me do that. The house was never truly mine to give away. It was always yours. It was signed, simply, Mom. My hands were trembling. It was everything I had ever needed to hear. It was a complete and total confession, an admission of the fundamental truth I had been forced to prove in the cruelest way possible. I picked up the photograph that had fallen onto the counter. It was from years ago. Maybe when I was in high school. The three of us stood in front of the house, squinting in the bright summer sun. My father must have taken it. We were all smiling. It was before the lines had been drawn, before the roles had been assigned, before I was the foundation and Rachel was the decoration. We were just a family. I turned the photo over. On the back, in my mother's same elegant hand, were 4 words. We were never fair. And that's when the tears came. They were not hot tears of rage or bitter tears of regret. They were a quiet, cleansing flood, a wave of profound, soul-deep relief. I sat down at my dining room table, the site of my eviction, and I wept. I wept for the years I had spent being invisible. I wept for the quiet, dutiful girl who had never asked for anything but had been expected to give everything. I wept because the validation I had craved for a lifetime had finally arrived. A message in a bottle washed up on shore long after my ship had sailed. The war was over, and this was the sound of the ceasefire in my own heart. Later that night, when the tears had dried and a fragile quiet had settled over me, I took out a piece of my own stationery. I felt a need to respond, not for her, but for me, to articulate the truth of my own journey. Mom, I wrote, "Thank you for your letter. I want you to understand something. This was never about the house. It wasn't about the money. It was never about winning. All I ever wanted was to be seen as a real part of the family, not just a utility that kept it running. I wanted to be chosen, just once. I didn't want to win. I just wanted you to see what you were losing." I stared at the letter, at my own words, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could never send it. To send it would be to open a door. It would invite a reply, a conversation, a negotiation. It would be an invitation for the cycle to begin again, perhaps in a new, more insidious way. Her apology was a gift, but it was one I had to accept and then walk away from. The relationship was broken at the foundation. You could apologize for kicking out the cornerstone, but you couldn't put it back and expect the house to be as strong as it once was. My peace was too new, too precious, to risk on that chance. I folded my unsent reply neatly. I walked to my office and pulled a small wooden box from my desk drawer. Inside was the thick sheaf of papers from the original mortgage refinancing the contract that had been both my prison and my key. I placed my mother's letter, the old photograph, and my own final, silent words inside with it. I closed the lid. It was an archive of a lesson learned at an unbearable price. I walked to the sliding glass door and looked out at the backyard. The moon was high and bright. illuminating the lawn in a pale, silvery light. The autumn air was cold and clean. The anger, the burning, righteous fury that had fueled me for nearly a year was gone. I could feel its absence, a hollowed-out space inside me that was no longer aching. I placed my hand on the cool glass of the door, a barrier between my new, quiet world and the one that lay outside. "I'm not angry anymore," I whispered to my own reflection. "But I'm not coming back." Years had passed. 5, to be exact. The seasons had turned, the world had spun, and the sharp edges of my past had been worn smooth by the relentless, gentle friction of time. The house was no longer a monument to a battle won. It was simply my home. I had filled it not with things, but with a quiet, unshakable peace. The walls, once pale witnesses to my erasure, were now a warm, calming gray, holding the scent of my coffee, my books, the life I had built within them. I was standing on the front porch, watching the sky bleed into a spectacular tapestry of orange, pink, and bruised purple. It was early evening, that magical, liminal hour when the day exhales and prepares for the quiet of the night. I was pruning the white roses that now grew in thick, fragrant abundance along the porch railing, their petals catching the last rays of the dying sun. The rhythmic snip of my shears was the only sound, a small, satisfying punctuation in the stillness. A familiar figure came up the walkway. It was Tom, our mail carrier for the last 20 years. A man with a kind, weathered face and a slight limp. He usually just left the mail in the box, but today he was walking right up to the door, a single, crisp envelope in his hand. "Evening, Megan," he said, his voice a friendly rumble. "Got something for you here that needs a signature." I put down my shears and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Looks important." "Tom?" "Feels important." He chuckled, handing me the envelope and a small electronic device. I signed my name on the screen, the stylus moving with a familiar ease. He handed me the envelope. It was thick, creamy paper, with the embossed logo of the bank in the top left corner. My bank, the one I had chosen. "Have a good one," he said, turning to continue his route. "You too, Tom." I stood there on the porch, the envelope in my hand. As the sunset deepened, I knew what it was. I had been waiting for it. The final payment had been sent last week, a large lump sum transfer that had emptied a specific savings account I had been feeding for years. This was the confirmation, the final receipt. My fingers, steady and sure, tore open the seal. I pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. It wasn't a bill or a statement. It was a formal letter, a legal document. At the top, in bold, satisfying letters, it read, "Notification of mortgage completion," and below, a single, beautiful, triumphant sentence. "We are pleased to confirm that the loan for the property at 123 Oak Street has been paid in full." A slow smile spread across my face, a genuine, unforced expression of pure, unadulterated release. A single tear, one I hadn't anticipated, welled in my eye and traced a warm path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or anger. It was a tear of liberation. The last chain had been broken, the last debt, both financial and emotional, had been settled. I looked at the words on the page, a quiet laugh escaping my lips. "Finally done," I whispered to the roses, to the fading light, to the quiet street. As I stood there, soaking in the moment, a voice called out from across the street. It was my neighbor, a younger woman who had moved in a few years ago. She was getting out of her car, juggling a bag of groceries. "That looks like a happy piece of mail," she called out, smiling. "You look like you just won the lottery." I laughed, folding the letter carefully and tucking it into my back pocket. "Something like that. Even better, actually." "Well, whatever it is, congratulations," she said. "Hey, my brother-in-law is a real estate agent. He says the market in this neighborhood is insane right now. If you're ever thinking of selling, you could make a fortune on this place." I looked at my house. I looked at the strong, clean lines of the roof, the warm light glowing from the living room window, the solid oak door that I had chosen and installed myself. I thought of the scarred dining table I had long ago sanded down and refinished, its surface now smooth and dark and beautiful. I thought of the peace I had cultivated within these walls, a peace paid for with a currency of tears and resolve. I turned back to my neighbor, my smile still in place, but my eyes holding a different kind of light, a hard, clear, unyielding light. "Thanks, but I'm not selling," I said, my voice clear and steady in the evening air. "I'm keeping it." "Oh, that's great," she said, slightly taken aback by my intensity. "It's a beautiful home." "It is," I agreed, "and it's more than just a house. It's a reminder of who I am, and a reminder of who tried to kick me out." Her friendly smile faltered, replaced by a look of confusion, but I didn't elaborate. The story was mine, the victory was mine, the meaning was mine. I gave her a small, final wave and turned to go inside. I stepped over the threshold and closed the heavy door behind me. I didn't just pull it shut. I turned the deadbolt. The sound was magnificent. It was a solid, definitive, metallic thunk, a sound of absolute security, a sound of impenetrable boundaries. It was a sound I had never truly heard until I owned not just the house, but the power that came with it. For all those years I had paid the mortgage. I had been a tenant in my own life, always subject to the whims and demands of others. The locks had been theirs, not mine. Now, this sound, this simple mechanical action, was a declaration. This space was mine. The peace within it was mine. No one could enter without my permission. No one could ever evict me again. Leaning against the door, I closed my eyes. I no longer needed their apologies. I no longer craved their recognition. Their understanding was irrelevant. My mother's letter, tucked away in its box, was a historical artifact, the confession of a fallen regime. It was an acknowledgement of a truth I no longer needed anyone else to validate. My own survival, my own quiet, thriving happiness, was all the validation I would ever need. All I needed was for them to remember, wherever they were, in whatever small apartment they now shared, I needed them to carry the memory of what they had done. I needed them to remember that when they decided I was disposable, when they pushed me out onto the porch with my boxes and my broken heart, they made a catastrophic miscalculation. They thought they were just getting rid of a nuisance. They didn't understand that they weren't kicking out a daughter. They were kicking out the foundation. When they pushed me away, I took the entire roof with me. And the most beautiful part, the part that still brought a cold, hard smile to my face in the quiet of the night, was this: when their world ended, when they lost everything they had taken for granted. It wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of mine. The last of the sunlight faded from the windows, plunging the room into the soft, deep shadows of twilight. My life was my own. The power was my own. And a final, quiet thought settled in my mind, as clear and as solid as the deadbolt in the door. I left them the house and I took the power. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect. Feel free to share your own thoughts on the story. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And to help this story reach more people, please support it by hitting the hype button. Your support means the world.